Okay, so this is the intro for our second conversation with Rich Schneider. We did a part one where we talked about kind of Rich's history and all of his work kind of leading up to what he's doing right now in the UC system, negotiations with publishers for the UC system as a researcher and kind of his career path. And then we just had to stop kind of right up at the present. And so then this part two is more about just kind of looking forward towards the future, what Rich is working on right now, and kind of what's coming up. And it's a cold wintry day here in San Diego. So trying to keep dry and warm here in the rain. So this episode, it's on one level, it kind of starts out pretty dry. We're talking a lot about author rights and kind of some of the legal issues around author rights retention, copyright transfer, and about halfway through the conversation, I sort of had this realization just about how fundamental and important these the legal aspect of this is and the author rights are, and the conclusion that we kind of ended up coming to is just how this is when you're thinking about the creation of modern libraries, the next generation of libraries is going to look like. A very necessary first step is getting the legal framework right for retention of the rights, reversion of rights. So how can you pull in content that where the copyright had already been given away, 50 years ago, 20 years ago, last decade, and how we have the legal framework for making sure that authors and researchers and universities have the rights to actually use research articles going forward is absolutely important. So I kind of had a sort of this sort of awakening kind of halfway through the conversation, and hopefully you guys too do as well. So when you're and really what it comes down to is when you're thinking about these issues around the sorry, I'm tumbling the words, these legal issues, what it really comes down to is the right to use. Like, how are we going to be able to actually use the research articles, not just in terms of reading, downloading a PDF and looking at a PDF, but actually using the literature. When you're thinking about AI services, when you're thinking about first-class APIs and endpoints, and ways of pulling in the literature to various workflows, it's more than just, I can click on a link and see a PDF hosted on somebody else's website. It's both human and machine use of this content. And we're actually not in a really good spot right now to ensure that use going forward. So anyways, I hope you enjoy this episode, part two with Rich Schneider. And and so we'll get that going in a second here. So today's episode is sponsored by, who are we sponsored by? Space Time Super Terrific Library. And I apologize for the music. Jebediah insisted that it was playing during the plug. Okay, Space-Time Super Terrific Library takes the entire corpus of scientific knowledge and lets you fly through it across space and time in XR, which is extended reality. Compatible with all major sets and goggles, Space-Time Super Terrific Library is your space and your time for complete immersion into the literature. Rewind to the discovery of the first immune response cells, jump into a heaping pile of cryptographic mathematics textbooks, or peer through the eyes of the James Webb Telescope with all the relevant astrophysics papers floating around you at arm's reach. The Space-Time Super Terrific Library. Get your library card today. It's free!
It's too late to realize.
Hey, what's up, Rich?
Hey, Nate.
Okay. All right. So we're on my Zoom now, so I can record from my side over here.
Cool. Awesome.
Nice. Oh man. All right. So this is part two.
Sounds good.
Um, I actually kind of just first I'm kind of curious to hear about your band trip. Did you went out into the mountains, you said, to do some recording, or what was that about?
Oh no, I have this band that I've been playing with since right before COVID. We kind of formed
Hmm.
a pod and recorded an album and
You
we're just
you formed a pod like through COVID, so you guys were kind of like your own little
yeah,
bubble.
we wrote 10 or 12 songs and figured out which ones we want to record. And then some friends of mine have a recording studio in Brisbane. So then we spent a year or so on and off between our day jobs,
Hmm.
going down to the studio and recording. And one guy is a neurologist at Kaiser, another guy is a MD PhD dermatologist. So these are all folks that have day jobs like
Hmm.
myself. So
Hmm.
just did the music thing as an aside, and the band is called Light Chain, and
Okay. What
it'll
instrument do
be
you play?
I play drums. I've been playing drums since I was 7 years old, and
Uh,
I've been playing in bands my whole life, on and off, all through college and grad school. And I took time off during grad school and went out on the road and that kind of
hmm.
stuff. So,
Oh, nice.
music is definitely another whole part of my life. And so,
Hmm.
buddy, one of the guys in the band, the guitar player, had a birthday, so we
Hmm.
up and had a big music weekend where we just played music for days, really, and hung out and worked on new songs, and it was
Hmm.
really fun.
My parents tried really hard to get me into music. I did piano, and then I actually did the French horn all the way through high school, and I was just terrible the entire time. I just don't, yeah, I don't have that music bone.
Yeah, well, it's important, man. I think, like learning a language, forcing instruments on your children is a really important thing. And I've been doing that to both of my kids. I have two boys, and one plays
Hmm.
piano, one plays guitar, and
Hmm.
they really never got a choice in it. They got to
Yeah.
pick an instrument, but they didn't really get a choice about whether they were going to play something or not. So
Yeah, I think that's fair because it does teach you a lot. It's almost like, yeah, forcing them to learn math or English or whatever it is. And I guess maybe a broader step than that is pursuing some sort of like artistic endeavor where it's like very like personal and lonely, like all the challenges that go along with like that those artistic adventures. But music is like the easiest kind of path to get their appetite whet on that.
no, for sure. And no matter what happens in your life, ups and downs and all kinds of stuff, you always have this skill set and your instrument and music
Hmm.
to fall back on or lean on or whatever. And it's also a great way to learn how to communicate with other people in a band,
Hmm.
and trying to figure out how to make music together. And it's also a gift that you know, share with other people. So every time
Hmm.
my 13-year-old plays the piano, it's just, it's mesmerizing. We all want to hear what he has to
Hmm.
say on piano, and it's a lot of
Hmm.
fun. So, um, it's yeah, music's really important, I
And
believe.
your kids have picked it up, like they're good and they enjoy it.
They're both, yeah, really,
Hmm.
really good at what they do. My older son, 17, he's plays acoustic and
Hmm.
electric guitar, lots of finger picking, really complicated stuff. He's
Hmm.
fantastic. And the
Hmm.
13-year-old is into jazz piano, boogie woogie, all kinds
Oh,
of
nice.
really
That's awesome.
complicated stuff. So, yeah, no, it's fun. And we play, I mean, all through COVID, in addition to my kind of adult band, I had the family band, the Partridge Family Band, and we
Oh, nice.
played music all the time. It was a really good experience to get us together
Mhm.
and off screens and doing
Yeah.
something fun. So
Oh man, yeah, that's a whole other topic. I'm just realizing how complicated the just screen time, but specifically phones and social media is going to be. My oldest is only 5; he's about to turn 6, so I have a few years to figure it out. But I'm because I have not figured out how to like self-regulate my own like phone
yeah,
usage. So
yeah.
yeah, are you in the thick of that phase right now, or not so much? Are they?
Yeah, the 13-year-old still has a flip phone, and
Hmm.
every day he comes home and tells us how humiliating it is and how his friends think that his parents are hippies, because not only do
Yeah.
we prevent him from getting, a new smartphone, but that, we've kind of forced our militant vegetarianism on him. And so he's
Uh,
just he's like, my parents don't let me eat what I want to eat, and I can't have a
Yeah.
phone I want to have. And he made a really good presentation with PowerPoint the other day about all the reasons why he should have a phone and what he needs it for, and
Oh man.
it was
Yeah.
really good. He recorded actually he did a dramatic recreation of what a phone call sounds like on his end on the flip phone when I'm giving him instructions. And it was
Oh
really
my
good.
God. At what point does he deserve it, man? That's
He's
above.
like, what? And then you hear, and he says, Dad, what? I can't understand what you're saying. And it's like, Dad, this is so frustrating. I don't understand what you're trying to tell me.
Oh man.
He's like, because we can't communicate with the phone, I really need a smartphone.
Yeah.
Not gonna happen though. Not this
Yeah.
year. I said, give up on it.
Yeah. 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 They'll have plenty of time for that. I've actually
It's
started looking
funny
into
because a
the
lot of the tech kids in his school, their parents who work at tech, their kids
mm,
have flip phones.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, my partner just got kind of mad because I've started to teach. So my kid is 5 year old, but because of like AI and GPT-4, like it kind of has opened the door for like people who probably aren't quite ready to code, but to learn some software stuff. And so we've been programming some just some little like dinky games, like we made tic-tac-toe and a little like ball game and stuff. And but yeah, I don't know. Because I told him if he was like getting addicted to a phone game, and I told him if he made his own game, he could play that as much as he wants. But then like he was able to quickly make it. So now I need to figure out what my next like constraint is. So.
Right. And it's like Grand Theft Auto, but it's strollers.
Yeah. Oh, is that a real thing? Or are you saying we should
No,
do
I'm
that?
just saying maybe he comes up with a concept where
Oh
instead
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah, yeah,
stealing
yeah.
cars, you're stealing strollers.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, we had to switch him. He was playing some like game that just involved, it was like a tower defense game and it was shooting, but there was guns in it. And then he started drawing guns
I see.
like at school. And I was like, oh my God, this is so bad. And so we had to switch him. Yeah. Yeah, anyways.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of a busy day for me. So I need to just kind of like
Yeah,
check
and
where
we've
we
got an
where we
hour,
were left off last time. What'd you say?
and we've got about an hour, if that's cool with you. Is
Okay,
that
yeah, no, yeah, that's cool. We can just let me know when we're you got to run. So okay, so I'm just looking down here. So last time basically we did like the life history of Rich last time and got all the greatest hits.
sure?
But also focusing on the all the policy side, the UC negotiations and all that kind of stuff. And then at the very end, we kind of started talking about like what you're working on now. Um, I was kind of personally interested in the next generation library publishing. It sounds like I don't know how much you're going to be able to talk about that, but I did kind of want to, if you're, I mean, we can talk about whatever the fuck you want to talk about, but I loosely to start off with wanted to just kind of keep moving forward chronologically with a
Sure.
what you're working on right now, but then also kind of really digging into like what we think the next like 5 to 10 years, next 10 to 20 years might look like, and then kind of a central theme for me, and kind of the reason why I wanted to go around having these conversations is I'm just like very probably idiosyncratically fixated on this idea of separating content creation by publishers and like the storage of content in some sort of library or non-commercially controlled infrastructure. And I just kind of realized a lot of different people have different ideas of what that is, like how far we should go, if that is sort of already happening based on what the current activities and the current trajectory. So yeah, I kind of wanted to step through
Yeah.
that. Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, we can totally talk about that. And with regard to the next generation library publishing
Mhm.
project, that was something that that I'm involved in as an advisory board member.
You're just kind of like consulting on random things.
Yeah, I'm brought in, we have these meetings, updates. So the project um, originally was Catherine Skinner from Educopia
Mhm.
and Catherine Mitchell from the California Digital Library,
Mhm.
and then Kristen Rattan
Mhm.
from Stratos.
Yeah.
And they were the PIs on this grant. And really the idea was to um, get a bolus of money that then they can kind of distribute to
Mm. So it's
third
kind of like an
parties.
umbrella or kind of
Yeah,
thing, like a
to
catalyst.
kind of build an integrated ecosystem for for publishing, for
Mhm.
scholar or institution-led publishing. Something that is much more aligned with academic missions and academic values. I mean, one of the big challenges for academic publishing is they can't really, at this point, historically, have not been able to compete with the big commercial service providers. The services
Yeah.
that those providers offer are much more sophisticated, they're slick, they're integrated. The quality of the output in terms of, typeset and proofing and all of that, and time to publication. They outsource all of that stuff for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, the big ones at least, and it's
Mm-hmm.
very efficient. And they're constantly reinvesting in technologies. And so in that competitive ecosystem of, the best looking journals and the
Yeah, yeah.
best services for authors and so on,
But also brand loyalty and then
and
building
brand
that
loyalty,
brand
but
in the community.
the,
Yeah.
the academic, in-house academic presses, not like I'm not talking about like the book publishing units, but I'm talking about the journals that are supported in-house,
Mhm.
oftentimes in academic environments, have never really had that sophisticated level of
Yeah.
output or service. And so the idea here is, if we want to help in the transition of moving scholars away from, and their societies away from, commercial for-profit companies that are providing the publishing services, that we have to build a competitive product that scholars will say, "Yo, this is great. This is all we really need." Everything from manuscript ingestion, peer review management, and all of the stuff that happens,
Yeah.
downstream from. So that's kind of what the Next Generation Library Publishing Project was, really, to kind of
Yeah.
this ecosystem, to build tools and standards, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then have it be really community governed, uh,
Mm-hmm.
with all kinds of criteria for who gets to participate, and how that ecosystem, what needs to happen for that ecosystem
Mm-hmm.
to flourish and to kind of advance and
Yeah.
transform scholarly communication. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And as you were talking, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I haven't spoken this out loud or thought this through yet. I'm just kind of reacting. I had been kind of fixated on the commercial publishers and this like concept of like, okay, well, they've clearly failed at being a library or even really integrating well with like shared public infrastructure, like library type, what we would traditionally define as a library. And I'm wondering if the exact same problem might happen on the library publishing side, where they're obviously going to do that much, much, much better, but they might just continue to fail. Like, I mean, I guess this is what the NGLP is trying to address. I wonder if they're. Do you feel like? And again, I mean, maybe take off your advisor hat and just be a regular citizen if you want to offer some critiques here. Do you feel like there's the right incentive structures and there's the right freedom to pivot in the way that they would need to pivot to create high quality, like, consumer products, right? Because I feel like one of the things that the marketplace does well is it's just incredibly ruthless with getting people what they want, like the polish and all the stuff that you're talking about. And then they're just fucking horrible most of the time on ethics unless they get regulated or like are forced to like keep their feet to the fire. I'm probably being a little harsh. I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, but I hadn't really thought of that side. Like maybe you could be too like, I don't know. And that's why I've always just thought of it being like division of labor kind of. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, there is a large grassroots movement of researchers, scholars that want to leave commercial publishers. They
Yeah.
see this um, failure of the publishers to align with the values of academia. And it's not just about the profits. It's really, like you say, I mean, there's ethics, there's
Yeah.
pressure from the boards, from
Mm-hmm.
the companies, to direct editorial processes and
Yeah.
so on. And also a lot of the scholars just don't want to be associated with these commercial entities for lots of reasons, and
Mm-hmm.
want to have a lot more control of the whole product, whole completely integrated life cycle of an article. And also because the scholars themselves are, as doing the peer review, doing the editorial work. So the imprint, other than reputation, the typesetting, the branding, that's trivial from a
Yeah.
publishing point of view. the sophistication in terms of layouts and typography and all the stuff that can be done in-house through all kinds of platforms.
Yeah, but
That
what I always am flabbergasted by, and just where I kind of always land in this like puddle of confusion, is like the reputation kind of ends up trumping everything. Like, it doesn't matter how nice of a platform you build. Like, technologists come through all the time and are building these platforms and it looks nice and all that stuff, and it just seems to never stick relative to like, oh, like, Elsewhere came in and bought this brand, and they just like ruthlessly keep that brand in that community somehow. And I know it's where I get really confused
to an
and honestly
extent,
get a
that's
little
not entirely
disillusioned.
true. That's not entirely true. Like we see
Okay,
discipline after discipline. Linguistics is a really good
that's
example of,
true. Yeah, they switched
we
over.
see many other disciplines. New disciplines are coming around saying like, we want to start from scratch and we
Yeah.
don't want to kind of go down this road. We want something to support. So we see lots of new journals looking at
Okay.
academia.
So it's happening. Maybe just when I first started, I was kind of like wanting it to happen very fast, but these things just kind of happen slowly. But you are seeing really positive, strong signs in that
Absolutely.
direction. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, eLife is a great example.
Yeah.
Um, and there are, in STEM fields, you're right, it's much harder to make a dent because, the Science, Cell, Nature journals have such brand recognition, they have such impact, they have such importance for a whole bunch of
Mhm.
other um, processes around tenure and grant renewals and all promotions, all that kind of stuff. So that is a hard piece to break away from. But in lots of other small disciplines, lots of other disciplines that don't have those issues, there we see a lot of journals wanting to leave and need a place to go. And that's really what the
Yeah.
NGLP was. It was really just help us, help scholars develop
Yeah.
an infrastructure, and help libraries become the natural organic place for that infrastructure to support scholarship and scholarly publishing and so on.
Yeah.
So
One idea that just came out of my conversation with Ash, I did one of these podcast things with Ashley, and you know, uh, so if you really zero in on the reputation, the prestige issue, and you really see that as the service that the commercial publishers are providing, um, and let them have that, or well, not let them have that, but just like understand that that's what they're providing. And you see this with preprints, right? Like they fought the preprints, and then now they're kind of okay with preprints because they realized it didn't actually affect their bottom line, right? Because people are still paying for prestige and stuff. And so that's actually one like mental track I've been kind of exploring as well, where researchers are probably always going to pay some premium for some reputational boost. It's almost like paying for an ad or something. You know what I mean? You're paying for to like be in this club or this prestigious thing. But for me, it kind of helped me. I don't know, feel more confident about these other pathways where even if they don't get that, even if that's not like an integral part of the product. But let me actually step back and ask you this. Do you think that those are always going to be linked, and that like things like NGLP and things that are coming out of like basically the appropriate infrastructure, but then try to push into like a what we normally interact with as like a high prestigious journal? Do you think that it should keep those two things linked and try to get to that prestigious level, or do you think it should stay as infrastructure and maybe some are prestigious and some aren't, but it doesn't really matter? And then, but then knowing that all of the content and that's kind of like the starting point, and similar to how preprints you kind of flow into some other service to then pay for prestige or stuff. Like, do you see those as integrally linked in the product of publishing, or could you imagine a future where they're kind of separated and commercial publishers are always going to charge $10,000, $20,000, whatever to get into their journal, but that's fundamentally decoupled from the storage of those articles, the access to those articles, maybe not typeset in the same way, but like that kind of thing. I don't know if that's making
no,
sense.
it does make sense, but there are all kinds of problems with
Yeah.
that model because, so let's just
The
say,
model of separating.
yeah, let's
Yeah.
just say publishers get to get the content and they put their imprint and that's the prestige, but then there's this whole parallel path for an article, which is in a green open access repository,
Mhm.
or in a preprint server. What can readers do with those articles? What's your understanding of what can be done around text and data mining or reuse of that material?
You mean
Because
in the green OA, or when they
yeah,
move over to the
or
publisher?
even as a preprint.
I mean, I would love to have the actual ecosystem digital infrastructure be on the library side. So basically, having library and academic community supporting a really rich ecosystem for accessing those articles, both human friendly and machine friendly, all the text and data mining, basically existing there. Basically flipping it and having that be the version of record, and then kind of like shoving like the for-profit journals more into like a Scientific American kind of role, where it's like, oh, okay, and then I'm going to take this and then go like publicize it in this like other thing, but really shifting the weight of the infrastructure, the access, all of the services around kind of access would be really built natively around that library infrastructure is kind of what I'm thinking, but I'm not really sure what the pathway to that is.
Well, the challenge there is that, I mean, currently, as soon as you give your work to a publisher, you're required to grant a set of rights to that publisher, generally the exclusive commercial rights to that work, the exclusive derivative rights to that work. And so anything that happened, anything that, if previous versions are in repositories or previous versions are in preprint servers, copyright law would say that whatever the final version, whatever restrictions on the final version also apply to the pre version and the green open access version.
Okay, well, hold on. So this is actually new to me. So can you actually, I don't know how much you know about that, but I would love to hear more about that. So if an author preprints by archive and then they go to publish it, and then let's say the publisher starts restricting like machine access.
Let's say self-press. You put something in bioarchive, and then you submit it to Cell, and Cell Press says
accepts
yes,
it, publishes it.
When the author signs the licensing agreement, if it's a subscription article, it's a copyright transfer agreement. If it's
how would that? So let's just stick with that specific point. So let's say it's a copyright transfer. It's like a paywall subscription based thing. Are you saying that a lot of times those license transfers would require them to pull, unless they have
no. Generally there's a pre-existing there's a pre-existing license to deposit that work and make it freely available, but any subsequent use of that work is restricted by the final license.
So like if bioarchive had a service, like a text and data mining service, like they could go back and say, hey, you're not allowed to do it for this preprint because we publish it.
Well, the publisher would most likely send us, would send some sort of cease and desist for copyright infringement on that. There's a difference between kind of depositing and disseminating for the purposes of reading, and then for the purposes of reuse, anything beyond fair use under copyright law would be precluded by whatever license agreement you sign at the end.
Yeah, but doesn't fair use, like, for me, and maybe I'm getting this totally wrong, but like, so if you think of like a figure, right? Like you can't copyright the actual data. You can copyright like how that figure looks. But if you like turned a bar graph, whatever, like and like replotted it or something, that would still be fair use. In my mind, I was kind of imagining if it's like the author approved manuscript, it doesn't have any of the typesetting or whatever, you could just go and use that. But maybe I'm not thinking about that correctly.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure.
There's probably some devil in the detail shit here that we would have.
I mean, fair use is, always being tested. Scholars are saying, we think this is fair use. Publishers are saying, we think this is not fair use. There's always this tension between what's considered fair use and what is not. And the publishers are doing things that constantly restrict fair use. And even though there might be fair use applications for a given work, license transfer, the copyright transfer, the license agreement oftentimes steps right over fair use and restricts even fair use. So we see that. And one of the UCLAS principles was to have no restrictions on fair use as a kind of minimum. Beyond that, we want all other kinds of uses, but just in the kind of basic framework for the current publishing ecosystem, you've got copyright transfer agreements for paywalled content. Now, in a world where you're publishing open access, generally, we hope most scholars use Creative Commons licenses, and the most liberal would be a Creative Commons attribution license, a CC BY. But we see a lot of scholars, and we see a lot of publishers, and we see a lot of professional societies requiring the availability of Creative Commons licenses that put no derivative and no commercial restrictions on this license. So it's a CC BY NCND. And in those cases, you can't just go into bioarchive and take an article. Like if you have a article that's restricted on the final version of record with
Yeah.
a NCND, you can't just go to bioarchive and take that work and make all kind of derivative uses of it. You can't
Yeah.
do generative AI. You can't do all kinds of things
Yeah.
with it if it has these final license restrictions. So the idea that you can separate these two things and let publishers do their one thing, because I'll
Yeah.
tell you what's going to happen. The publishers will do their thing and they're going to protect the
Yeah.
content that they're publishing in ways that will prohibit scholars from doing the
Yeah.
kinds of things that scholars want to do.
Now, but then on the flip side, if you imagine a world where the people on the infrastructure side, more on the library side, are, and I don't even know how feasible this would be, but if they are so popular and integrated in with the workflow and the community and like the establishing of like kind of norms and standards, there's a possibility where that could then start flowing into like what those copyright transfers look like and basically ensuring some sort of like minimum standard for use. I mean we have a long way to go to get there,
No,
but
that's what our open access policies do. Our
yeah,
open access policies at institutions that have them, and there are
yeah,
hundreds and hundreds of institutions that have them, assign a pre-existing non-exclusive license to some entity in the university. In our case, in the University of California, it's the regents. So when I
yeah.
submit
So
an
would you say
article,
that UC, like if you're publishing within the UC because of like the OA policy that you help navigate or negotiate, so are we, is that situation where there's that like a kind of retroactive like clamping down on periods, is that not something that UC scholars have to worry about?
for certain uses.
Okay.
So what our open access policy does is it allows our authors to make a copy freely available to the world for the purposes of dissemination. And so our open access policy grants a pre-existing non-exclusive license to the regents of the University of California, so that when I send an article to a publisher and they ask me for an exclusive license to publish,
Yeah,
an
because you
exclusive
can't.
license, I've already given my regents a non-exclusive license, so I can't also give someone else an
Yeah.
exclusive. So it has to be a non-exclusive
And so
license.
does that is that also for, so that's for anything. So that includes even subscription or paywall journals that they're sending it to. So how does that work? That basically just gives them the right to put it on a preprint server and things like that.
It goes into e-scholarship, which is not a preprint server. It's the author's accepted manuscript. It's the
Okay.
final peer-reviewed
Yeah.
manuscript.
Okay.
That's what our
That,
final,
okay, but just for that. So basically allow them to put it into e-scholarship, but not do other things with it. Once they get to the
because generally whatever the final license is on the work is going to apply to that e-scholarship, except for that pre-existing non-exclusive right
yeah.
for making the work freely available. And so I think we have to figure out a way to not only make sure that publishers don't have exclusive rights to commercialize the work, but that they have, make sure they don't have exclusive rights to derivative use of the work. I mean, the way that we're going to see rapid advancement in science and scholarship, progress, return on investment for funding agencies that have spent all this taxpayer money investing in research, is if that work can not only just be read, but reused,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
taken apart,
Yeah.
modeled, training AI,
Yeah.
generating
I mean, the
AI
AI really
output.
puts like a lot of pressure on this because there's a lot of like opportunity there for like just like connecting people that are working on the same thing and like creating
Yeah.
efficiencies there and yeah,
And the
discovery.
publishers are already very, very aggressively trying to secure the collections that they have
Yeah.
from any AI use. They're basically sending these addenda to our existing library contracts that say your scholars can't use any of our corpus of material for any kind of training for AI models, for any kind of outputs of AI models. So that basically says, even if we're licensing content, subscription content, through, say, an Elsevier database or a Wiley database or a Springer Nature database or whatever, our scholars, they're telling us our scholars can't use that for any kind of AI related research. And we're saying, hell no, no way.
Yeah.
This is fair use. We're pushing back. We're not signing these addenda, at least not yet, until we've
Okay.
had
Yeah.
some.
That was going to be my next question is how do you, yeah, what's the
No,
process
we're not.
there? Yeah.
Now that some countries are, some countries that publishers are as aggressively as possible pushing out these addendas so that scholars, because why do you think this is? Why do you think these publishers are preventing generative AI or training of machine learning, all kinds of stuff with their corpus of materials.
I mean, beyond just like being the basis for additional services that they could charge for,
Yeah,
or is there some other?
exactly. They're going to make competitive products in the marketplace.
Yeah,
They want to be able to license all
yeah,
of this content to ChatGPT and others at some crazy rate, the content they've already commercialized
yeah,
and recouped any kind of investment on subscriptions. Subscriptions are going away. No one's arguing with that anymore, right? The new thing is monetizing the content in ways that were
yeah,
not really just read access. It's now
yeah,
licensing that content that they own either the complete copyright on, because
yeah.
authors have transferred all those copyrights, or content for which they have exclusive commercial and derivative use, and be able to license that content without compensating authors,
I
without
think what
protecting
I
them.
think what riles me up about this is that like it just feels like this is striking a nerve at kind of like the heart of like what the whole fucking enterprise of science is supposed to be, right? Like the whole
Yeah,
fucking thing we're doing here is creating content for other researchers to try to replicate and fucking use. Like,
yeah.
and so I feel like I don't know, people get really mad at me when I like use apocalyptic terms or like,
No,
you know,
I
like
agree with
kind of
you.
like, you know, sometimes I like use analogies like slavery shit. I get myself in all sorts of trouble. But like for me, like it feels this is very like central in core. It's like I almost feel like we're being asked like what is science and like what is the impact and result of all of this shit we're doing, all this grant money and all the fucking, you know, missing Christmas and birthdays to do all these experiments. Like, what is going to be there for the next generation? And I don't know. I just like, I get kind of riled up about this, specifically with the use. You know, I think
Yeah,
once I learned how much like Web of Science or whoever somebody was charging for access, machine access to their corpus, like for an API seat, it just makes me fucking livid. It was like
yeah.
$100,000 for a single researcher to be able to like have their script access the corpus. And it's like, I don't know. I get really riled up about this stuff, but I don't know if that's like warranted or if you feel the
But
same
that's,
way.
of course, that's the
Yeah.
whole point of this. That's
Yeah.
why we're trying to build infrastructure. That's
Yeah.
why we're trying to push these policies
Yeah.
that prevent, prevent publishers from more or less carving out for this, for their personal gain as opposed to for the gain of society at large.
Yeah.
Right? They
Do
see an
you?
opportunity here to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so from the policy side, institutions should be pushing. From the funder side, funders should be pushing for broad, not only dissemination deposit rights, but broad reuse rights.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's hopefully that's what we're working on. That you asked me what I'm working on now, that's what I'm working on.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So actually, yeah. So can you go into that a little bit? So is that's part of the NGLP, or there's other additional like infrastructure type stuff that
No,
you're?
this is kind of a UC,
Oh, the UC like stance on all this. Okay.
yeah, so and we're also working with lots of global partners,
Mm-hmm.
Germany, the Netherlands, and many
Mm-hmm.
other places around what we call author rights broadly, and those
Yeah.
are the rights of authors to make decisions about how their work gets used, uh,
Mm-hmm.
to grant publishers the licenses that they need for publishers to do what they need to do. But these have to be non-exclusive licenses. Authors need to retain all uses and all control over that work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they can share that with the publisher. Now, those are for the vast majority of authors, for most purposes, they should be choosing Creative Commons
Yeah.
attribution license, just CC BY. And then
Yeah.
none of this is a real issue because the works in the public space, all that has to happen is proper attribution for that work. But like you just said, we create all this work, we miss birthdays and
Yeah.
holidays so that we can generate, but then it's in the public sphere and it can be used in whatever way.
Yeah, and
But
that's actually really important because I kind of tend to get a little like I jump ahead to like the technology and how the platforms and all and standards and all that shit. But this is actually needs to happen first. You need
right,
to stop that flow and protect. Like you need to have like cover on the legal side, and then whatever infrastructure happens, it's gonna because people are gonna just continue to send their articles to journals. Like we're not gonna be able to stop that flow. I don't know whether it's OA or subscription, and so this is actually like a almost a necessary first step to the blossoming of any infrastructure that would basically require those legal protections.
right. And so
Yeah.
what we're doing, and it's also, this is no offense to my colleagues, but this is way too complicated and nuanced for the vast majority of scholars to even pay attention to, right?
Yeah,
Scholars have their
like it's
own
we're
rules.
asking you to become a car mechanic or
That's
something
right.
like this.
And this
Yeah,
is all stuff that I've like learned
yeah,
on the job, right? I have no formal training in this, but I happen to be um, able to collaborate with legal scholars and academics who do pay attention to these issues, and a lot of folks in the library. So I've benefited from that.
Mhm.
And we want to solve this problem without scholars even noticing.
Yeah,
We
exactly. I
basically
think
want
that's
to fix the infrastructure in the background. We want to fix the licensing. We want to fix the language,
Mhm.
and align the language of the publishers with what we believe is in the best interests of scholarship and humanity and
Mhm.
taxpayers, so that these problems are kind of solved without scholars even noticing. Scholars can continue to sign their license to publish agreements, and
Yeah.
they're working it out there, but the work is then getting out there with the right
Yeah.
kinds of kind of controls and rules and understanding of what can be done with that work.
Quick technical question.
Sure.
Did that, I'm assuming that these policies apply by virtue of them being a faculty member at a UC. There's not like some action that they need to take. Like for example, they don't need to like go deposit e-scholarship in order for those protections. They're just by virtue of being at a university, like the university, this blanket has that, even if the author doesn't interact with these at all and just goes right to a publisher, correct? Or is that
Correct.
not
Yeah.
right?
So in our first iteration of our open access policy back in like 2005, where we kind of blew it was we thought we would have an opt-in policy,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't get passed, and it was a big legal kind of
Mm.
hurdle. And then so we kind of dropped it on that. And then Harvard and MIT, they kind of developed the Harvard model policy, which was an opt-out policy.
Yeah, yeah, you
And
want the opt out because you
the
want them to be
genius of
invited.
that is
Yeah.
that so once we passed our open access policy at UCSF and then at the academic senate level, and now we have a system-wide presidential policy that covers everybody in the UC
Okay.
system.
Okay.
And as a function of our employment, we're already part of the group
Got it.
that
Got it.
has to
Okay.
comply with this
Cool.
policy. And the only way to not comply is to have a publisher ask you to opt out or an author opt out on their own. But
Well, but that is a vulnerability because like that's one of the leverage that the publishers have, right? You get to the end of like, hey, you're accepted. We're about to publish. Like, click this box, otherwise we're not going to publish it. How do you have you thought about
yeah,
how to?
we have really vast majority. We see this, with all kinds of institutions with
Uh-huh.
a very, very low request for opt-out rate.
Okay.
One on the order of 1 or 2%. And we don't even really see many opt-outs
Okay.
anymore. We
Yeah.
do see embargo requests, which are
Mhm.
like 6-month or 12-month embargoes, but for the vast majority of our content, we're publishing it immediately in e-scholarship,
Mm.
and publishers are not asking our authors to opt out. So,
Okay.
I mean, we've made it really clear that this is not something that we're willing to do.
Mhm.
We notified all these publishers saying, like, unless you ask our authors to opt out, we're going to assume that they will
Mhm.
comply with our open access policies. But again, that's a deposit, right? So authors can make their work freely available, but it doesn't necessarily have the reuse rights that we want to see unless an author specifically assigns a certain license to that deposit and also assigns the right kind of license to the version of record.
So, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now, would under the current policy, could um, let's say just for the sake of argument, like e-scholarship didn't exist, could you have your deposit be into like bioarchive or a third party, or does it have to be something controlled by UC?
No, there's PubMed Central,
Oh, PubMed Central, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Okay,
which is
so
a
that.
great example, but those are funder mandates.
Mhm.
And so, only about, not only, but like 50% of the scholarship in the UC system that's generated is covered, or at least at UCSF is covered by PubMed Central, and the other 50%, we needed a mechanism to get that
Got
work
it.
out
And so
as
that's
well.
e-scholarship covers
And
that.
that's what the open access policies did.
Yeah. Um, yeah, because I have another kind of, I don't know if it's a pet peeve or what, I'm not sure what to call it, but like I this idea that like when especially when you're thinking about like setting up a journal repository, I kind of it's hard for me to wrap my head around. I mean, I understand like UC should create services for like just the UC employees, and for repositories it kind of makes sense, but you sometimes see like publishing venues, but they're only for like UCSD or UCLA, and I never understand that. It's
That's
like
not what e-scholarship is, the
yeah,
official repository for the UC system, but it's also a publishing platform with over 100 journals that
yeah,
are
where
meant
then
to
those
be.
can flow in from anywhere. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and yeah, so there's content in e-scholarship that's beyond the UC system. So Um,
Okay, that's
it's
nice.
not,
Yeah, because sometimes I run into people where they're like, just like they don't accept things from outside because they're like, hey, we're this is like supported by this university, and so we're just not gonna like help anybody outside. And it always like I'm
yeah,
like scratching
because
my head.
it costs money, and
Yeah,
that's the investment in infrastructure that libraries and universities are trying to make, so that these
yeah,
things are viable alternatives, and that there's also accompanying infrastructure. So it's not just sufficient to kind of put your stuff into the archive, but that you can actually people can read it. I get an update every month on how many downloads. I've had hundreds of downloads of my content of stuff that's also commercially available. But people are
Mhm,
coming to eat scholarship. And guess what? They're coming from the global south. They're coming from
mhm.
all kinds of places that don't have subscription access. And they're downloading you can see where it comes from. You can see,
Yeah,
and
that's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, there's almost like a collective action problem where if all the universities start like investing in a particular piece of the infrastructure and it's globally focused, then you can just do a really good job with your part and then know that other universities are going to fill in the other gaps. So that's like another model that I think is interesting. I don't know if that's happening or how that's happening,
It
but
is
like,
happening. There's a
yeah,
lot of activities like that. There's a
okay,
lot of collaboration. It's really impressive how much the libraries are working
yeah,
these issues with all kinds of um, groups that are affiliated groups. Spark is doing a lot in this space. Uh,
hmm,
and like the NGLP, the Next Generation Library Publishing Project, and yeah, I mean, UC is doing. There's lots of OA 2020 is doing a lot in this space. There's workshops and
hmm,
all kinds of annual meetings around this. So, there is a global transformation happening. It is coordinated on many levels. And to be honest, it's, you know, it's working better in some areas than others, but
hmm,
there's a lot of coordination. There's a lot of common goals. People just
hmm,
have sometimes different ideas about what the best way to get there are. Some people don't
yeah,
really believe in the way that UC is leading the transformation in the United States around and participate in this global transformation using um, kind of a article processing charge
hmm,
forward model that people believe that there's other ways to achieve open access, whether it's a green route. MIT is a big champion of green open access.
hmm,
That doesn't necessarily solve the problem, like I talked about, with versions of record having restrictive licenses on them, because then that content in the green OA is more or less restricted in what can be done with it. But I think there's lots of people working on this problem, and we all have common goals, which is to
Well, is
destroy
there
subscriptions.
just to quickly hold for there on the Green OA for a second? Is there a way to evolve Green OA towards more of a version of record, or do you think that that's just by definition it's kind of not
No, I
really?
think there is. I definitely think there is. I mean, we see, for example, you could argue that what eLife is doing is exactly that. It's a
Yeah,
preprint,
where yeah, yeah,
and then it gets reviewed and it stays as it is if the author doesn't choose to do anything, or the author
yeah.
can respond to the reviewers. The
Mhm.
reviewers can read up it, but everything is transparent. It's more or less elevating preprints,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. It's the
and
start.
making, you know, so one could argue that's a good example. And I think it's great what they're doing. It's a really exciting experiment. It's a lot of work on the part of scholars. I've participated as an
Mhm.
author. I've participated as an editor. I've participated as a peer reviewer. It's a lot of work on everybody's part
Mhm.
to do that for any individual article. And so, is that scalable? I don't know.
Mhm.
But maybe for the prestige journals, that's the best way forward. And for other titles,
Mhm.
uh, it's a normal kind of process, but within the context of an academic ecosystem as opposed to a
Mhm.
commercial. The other thing to recognize is that um, we just finished a very successful negotiation with Wiley,
Mhm.
where we now have a 10 campus UC open access um, agreement, as well as SCELC, which is a large organization of schools like USC and Caltech and a whole bunch of other schools that are part of a coalition or association of libraries,
Mhm.
most in California, as well as a few Cal State schools.
Mhm.
And so it's a large kind of California wide with some other universities. Um, and it allows all of our scholarship with Wiley to be published open access. But it's, based on paying per article. And about half of Wiley's portfolio, it seems, are professional societies.
Hmm.
And the professional societies get a ton of revenue from the publishers.
Hmm.
Historically, that's come from subscription money. Oftentimes you're talking like $500,000 a year from a society, maybe more for many of them, to run their meetings, to provide
Hmm.
travel grants to students, to pay speakers to come, to do whatever, to subsidize the cost of meetings,
And
to
then
pay
what the publisher gets is they're the journal for that society, basically. So
the
the
publisher
society
gets the
model.
journal. Let's just say, you know, um, I've heard it said that a company like Elsevier might pay the society 10 cents on a dollar for every
ABC.
title. No, I'm talking about subscription.
Oh, for subscription.
And Wiley might pay 50 cents on the dollar for some of their societies. So every subscription dollar they bring in, X amount goes to the society.
Mhm.
And different, having talked to different societies, heard all kinds of different numbers about how much they get from the publisher. And the societies have grown to really like that money, right?
Mhm.
The members have really grown to like that money because it affords all kinds of perks for the society and helps the societies run. So societies are really loath to kind of give up their commercial relationships with these publishers because the publishers constantly sweeten the deal
Yeah,
and get societal cash. So you have this kind of relationship
yeah.
with societies and their journals. And so that was one of the hardest things with Wiley, was having them try to negotiate this agreement at the same time live up to the commitments that they've made with their professional societies. And so
Mhm.
that's going to be a challenge moving forward as well.
This might be a stupid question, but is there any version of that kind of model or that relationship for like OA journals, like somehow using the APC?
Yeah.
Does that, okay.
Yeah. So historically, the way that because subscription was the main revenue, societies saw APCs, publishers saw APCs as like icing on the cake. It was really an add-on.
Okay.
So they had their subscription revenue from the library, and then they got, what we call APCs in the wild. So let's just say the library was paying $1 million a year for subscription access, and then our scholars were paying $500,000 a year. The publisher was getting $1.5 million. The societies were getting the extra APC revenue less whatever overhead costs the publishers had. But that was like a direct conduit to the societies, as well as subscription contract, arrangements that the societies had. So that's really why why we started this, was because we wanted to capture all of those payments to the publishers and say, if we're giving you $500,000, our scholars are giving you $500,000 a year, and you're getting $1 million from us, we want that $500,000 to offset the $1 million that we're paying. We want what we call offsets in the beginning. Otherwise, we call that double dipping, where a publisher is
Yeah, yeah,
basically getting paid twice for the same content.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so we really kind of spent the first 5 years of this talking about double dipping, talking about the egregious payments that we were making for the same content.
Mhm.
And that was kind of transformative for
Mhm.
our author community, for our scholars. When I started going out talking to everybody about it, was about the money. And it was that point in particular.
Mhm.
Um, but a big part of all of this is how the societies get revenue. And we don't want to throw the societies under the bus. We want to make sure our societies are
Mhm.
supported. They're a really important part of the ecosystem. But what we want to do is give the societies a mechanism to run their own journals and
Mhm.
make a profit and have that all in-house in academia. Why should the publishers take 40% off the top? Why can't we just let why can't
Yeah,
we lower societies continue to get what they're getting,
yeah,
take the 40% out of the equation in
yeah,
savings.
yeah.
And
Well, and societies are in a really good position to do that because they have that, presumably they have that community, they have that, like, it's almost like that brand and the reputation that's owned by them and continue to support by them. So they're in a good position to do that, I think, compared to like, if you're just a random researcher in a community trying to convince everybody to go to some other journal.
right, but that's how it all started, right? You had these professional societies where everybody knew everyone.
Mhm.
You presented a work, then you published it, your colleagues reviewed it, it went into your society journal. And societies all, when I first started my society journal, um, I was a member of Society for Developmental Biology, and then we had this society journal called Developmental Biology. It was published by Academic Press. And then Elsevier bought Academic Press, and they took my society journal, and they own the name. And
Yeah.
this is a journal that goes back, over 100 years, 150 years, whatever it is. And so there's a lot of prestige. Some of the most
Yeah.
important papers in our field were published there, but we're trapped because now this
Yeah.
large commercial publisher owns that society journal. We can't leave. We can't go anywhere else because they own the name.
Yeah.
And there's this relationship between the society and the journal and how much revenue it gets. So it's
Yeah.
complicated there. But
Yeah.
we hope in the future societies will say, well, we don't need these commercial publishers. We have infrastructure that can provide a revenue stream for
Hmm.
the societies that doesn't run as a for-profit
Hmm.
infrastructure, but it runs as a kind of nonprofit. And
I'm
but
assuming for a lot of these societies that the business relationship with the commercial publishers does not give them the name, right? Like if they wanted to like leave, they could take their name and stuff with them, or is there weirdnesses there?
there's a lot. I mean, a lot of the titles are owned by the publishers, and it was
Oh,
just
okay.
scholars. This is the problem. Scholars had no idea. A publisher comes in and says, "Oh, we'll run your journal for you,
Yeah.
and we'll give you $500,000 a year."
Yeah.
Society's like, "Oh, that's awesome. We don't have to do a thing. All we have to do is pick an editorial board,
Yeah.
and we'll let the professional societies. We'll run the society. We'll let the journal be run by the publisher."
Okay. So
And then
that's
time the publishers just kind of like took more and more and more, and eventually recognized like if we don't have the name to this title,
yeah.
then we're going to lose everything at some point. And you saw that famous example with Elsevier and
Lingua.
the journal Lingua,
Yeah, lingua. Yeah.
right? And eventually the whole editorial board had to resign, and they went and started their new journal called Glossa.
Yeah.
And and
But an example of a really successful. I mean, it was probably unique in some respects, but like because there was just a high amount of community action there,
that's
but
right.
it was a successful shift to a different, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a
And
lot more work than if they could have just kept the name.
for sure, and they could have left with it, but yeah, for many reasons, and they call it zombie lingua, and if you publish in it, your name is mud, and everybody publishes in Glossa, and
Mm. Yeah.
you're seeing a lot of that, but yeah, we need to create. That's the idea about the infrastructure, and
Yeah.
so that's definitely something that I think needs to happen. I'm
Mhm.
really focused right now, like I said, on author rights and these agreements, and making sure going through systematically all of the license to publish agreements with all the publishers with whom we negotiate. We just went through a very successful revision of the license to publish agreement with Cambridge University Press,
Mhm.
working with PNAS and worked with
Mhm.
Wiley on. We're working with Wiley on this now. So every publisher then with whom we're interacting, we're focusing as part of the negotiations, in addition to some other non-commercial items, we're focusing on the rights of authors, because the rights of authors then extend to the broader community to be
Yeah.
able to reuse and derivative rights for this work.
Well, and because you're operating at such a high level at UC, it also can be like a standard bearer or whatever. So like whatever happens here can then be like mimicked and copied and like spread
Right.
out as a standard. So looking forward, like next 5 to 10 years, like where is the big kind of fight for you? I mean, you kind of have been mentioning throughout, but like, what is your like top 2 to 3 like really things you're focused on in terms of author rights that like the things you want to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I mean that's more or less, preparing um, the global corpus of scholarship for the future in
Reuse.
terms of reuse. Yeah,
Yeah.
and also working. One of the other things I've been working on now for a while is rights reversion. So, when I started my career, I had no idea about any of this, and the first
You
10 or
remind me
so,
again, what's rights reversion again?
I'm gonna explain to you. So when I started my career, I was signing copyright transfer agreements all the time for content. The first X 10 articles or whatever I published, I just transferred my copyright to all the publishers. My society journal, like I said, was owned by Elsevier, so Elsevier owns the copyright. Wiley owns the copyright on a bunch of my articles. And there's no reason why they need my copyright. Certainly not anymore. They've definitely recouped the costs, any costs that they might have had
Mhm.
by charging subscriptions for that content. So I, as a scholar, and many other scholars who have approached me, emeritus professors at the end of their career, they want to just take all the work they've ever published and kind of make reprints of it, and put that on a website or give that to colleagues, or
Yeah.
bind it, bind it and put it in a library, whatever. They want access to their content, but guess what? Much of that is still locked behind a paywall. Much of that is still under these very restrictive, prohibitive terms that the publishers have. So rights reversion is creating a very simple mechanism by which an author can request that prior content that has been used and licensed and where there was a copyright transfer can now get reverted back to the author. So
So
I can,
what is so yeah, tell me a little bit more about that. So like what so for that content the publishers kind of have the upper hand. So what is like your leverage or what leverage are you going to seek to try to like get that or make that happen more smoothly? What's
yeah, well,
what
the only leverage we have is during at the negotiating table. When
yeah.
we're sitting across the table from Wiley,
Oh, for future contracts. So you would withhold some future contract to get
yeah,
the
so what we just did, so we just published this contract with Wiley, and it'll be in the ESAC repository. You can find it on the Office of Scholarly Communication website, and there's a whole side letter. It's an exhibit where there's a whole list of non-commercial topics that were really important to us,
Mhm.
including author rights, rights reversion, participation in OA Switchboard, which is a really important organization for that you should check out for understanding metrics around open access usage, and so on. DEI initiatives
Mhm.
that are really important to our scholars in the UC community. In editorial independence. So these are all these things that, in addition to just the commercial terms, we've used all of these negotiations, whether it was with Elsevier or with Wiley or anyone else, uh, to interject non-commercial items that are important to our faculty. Many of them are coming out of these 18 rights and principles that UCALASC passed, that I talked about in that last segment, that laid out kind of what we see as the future of scholarly communication. And so when you ask me what am I working on, I'm like basically going down these 18 principles,
Yeah.
which when I put those together was me going out to all these people, finding out what are the most important things that you need to see change over the next 5 to 10 years in order to do X, Y, and Z, and
Mhm.
putting that all together into this document. So rights reversion will allow scholars to then control how their work gets reused. And we
Yeah.
see there's a great organization called Authors Alliance that's
Mhm.
doing this with books, lots of books that are under copyright that don't need to be under copyright anymore. They're
Yeah.
not even being reprinted. They're just sitting there. So authors want their rights back.
Mhm.
Publishers, are not publishing copies of them. There's no monetary gain. There's no competitive um, issues for the publishers. So the authors say, well, why can't I have my copyright back? So rights reversion is something that scholars should be thinking about. First of all, now we should never be signing our rights away. We should be
Yeah.
retaining copyright, but also regaining rights in work that we've previously transferred rights out of, is something that's important. And for all these reasons, mostly for reuse, mostly for derivative works, mostly to get that work out into public space so
Mhm.
that other scholars can build on it, not just by reading. I mean, we're long past the days where like you read an article, you take some notes, and then you write a new article. Like,
Yeah.
we've got machine readable stuff. We're
Yeah.
ingesting huge data sets. We want the same, we've got all these data policies that the funders are making that say data needs to be interoperable. It needs to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
accessible. It needs to be curated. It needs to be presented in a way that other scholars can take that data and reuse it. And why is that? Because we've invested hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in generating these data sets. And if
Yeah.
they just sit there and no one can reuse them,
Yeah.
then they're pointless.
Yeah.
So we want the same thing with the written work, with the
Yeah.
content that we're generating. We want that same level of being able to take figures and take them apart, being able to analyze data, analyze text,
Yeah.
analyze all kinds of stuff, and treat a publication as a data set just like any other kind of data.
Yeah, I felt a little weird about that. It's almost like I mean, I'm actually happy that there's been a lot of success on the data side, but in some ways it's actually sometimes surpassed like what you can do with the article itself, and it's a little
Yeah.
weird. Yeah.
Well, don't forget, so the data in almost all cases is owned by the university or the
Oh,
government.
so there's a little bit more wiggle room, yeah, or more power there, yeah.
Yeah, no publisher is going to claim control over data that's owned by the regents.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so there's always been this barrier even in a publication, for the most part, like when you publish, it doesn't include the IP. So if you own IP in something, when you transfer the rights to a publisher,
Mhm.
IP is retained by the author, retained by the institution. There's no intellectual property. There's no moral rights. There's kinds of rights that are retained by the author, retained by the institutions. It's just these commercial rights, these derivative rights,
Yeah,
reuse rights, translation rights, all kinds of stuff like that, that the publishers have been,
yeah,
seizing control. So that's kind of what I'm into right now. It's
yeah.
pretty esoteric. It's hard to get people excited about it, but it's the kind of thing that I feel like I don't really need to worry about if people are excited. If I know that on the backside, I'm working with the right people and
Yeah.
we're
No, this
doing the
is
right
like
thing.
yeah, you're working on the back end, right? You're working on like the technical standards that are going to allow the internet to exist, right? It's like you're not going to get grandma to like, like whip out like some like programming code. Like you're working on the back end. Yeah, it's really exciting because it's a necessary precursor to and again, like I said, I tend to really get excited about like the technology and like actually like the building of stuff. But you can't fucking do that if you don't have these pieces in place, right? Like there's missing content, the corpus isn't complete. Like so this is so it's really really exciting.
Yeah, when
And
you ask
I think
ChatGPT like a question and you get an answer that's obviously wrong,
yeah,
and you're like, well, you ask ChatGPT, what is the evidence for this, or why is this
mm,
wrong? And they'll say, well, my data sources are from 2020. I'm using data, older
yeah,
data, maybe something new has happened. But whatever, ChatGPT is wrong all the time, and especially the kinds of questions that I'm asking it
yeah,
around. Like if I've been trying to see if I can use it as a research assistant, like give me 10 references that support this idea, or there's this idea in the literature, where did it come from? And it responds with something, and I say, what's the evidence for that? And then it says, actually, there's no evidence for that. I stand corrected. What I said previously was wrong. Thank
yeah.
you
No,
for thank you for your
it's
diligence.
terrible right now. Yeah, it's
Right.
terrible.
And why is that? Because it's trained on a corpus of material that is not the most rigorous, robust corpus of material in the world. And what is the most rigorous, robust corpus of material? It's the material that comes out of academia. It's the peer-reviewed literature. We
Yeah,
want that content to train our robots. We want that content to be used for modeling all kinds of sophisticated things around climate science and cancer biology and neurodegenerative disease and viral evolution. We want the most rigorous
yeah,
content, academic content, to be what these artificial intelligence systems are using to be trained. And
yeah,
until we
yeah.
create
And
the
I think, and it,
rights infrastructure for that, we'll never see it.
yeah, and my conviction and my like conclusion from like seeing what's happening with the cosplay is that level of infrastructure is just never going to come from the publisher. So you have to claw it back so that we have the right to build that on the academic side because
Oh,
it's
no,
just
it will come from the publishers, but at what cost? The publishers will say,
well, that's true.
Elsevier will say, we've got Cell Press, we've got 25% of the journals in the marketplace, we've got the best training data set of any publisher. So come pay us for it.
Yeah, but this is where I fall back to where they're not actually doing it because that it's sort of like if you're trying to build a city, right? And you charge people to drive into the city, it's like it's not really a fucking city, right? Like it's a city because people flock in and there's no barriers there, right? And so like,
Right.
that's the access part, right? It's like you don't
Yeah.
actually have a thriving ecosystem if you only have some rich white dudes from like, North America accessing the content.
From Connecticut, New Jersey
Yeah.
coming in,
Oh yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
bridges in New York, the
Yeah, the
tolls.
toll, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the challenge, and that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against
Yeah.
publishers all of a sudden realizing that there is, it's a gold rush right now with information. Like on the one hand, you've got these technology companies, especially here in San Francisco, all of the AI companies that are blooming, that are going to create all kinds of sophisticated models for X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
for early detection of lung cancer or breast cancer, or understanding, viral evolution by comparing, all kinds of molecular biology data and stuff like that. So you're going to see all these amazing applications for AI, as also some really bad stuff like,
Yeah.
um, you know, manipulation of the public and
Mhm.
all kinds of deep fake stuff. But the publishers now are recognizing, God, we're sitting on a gold mine here. We've got all this content that we own the rights to.
Yeah.
Let's license it for lots of money,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, man. Well, I
Good
wish you
times,
luck on
man.
that endeavor. We're all counting we're all counting on you. Hopefully,
Well,
you're gonna be getting all the pieces in place so some of the technology people can come in and build cool stuff on top of it. And yeah, yeah.
awesome, Nate. Well, it's great to see you, man. Enjoy the weekend.
Yeah, you too, man. You doing anything
Spend
fun this
some
weekend?
time. And play a little music and watch so football skips a generation in my family, but my two sons are like obsessed with the 49ers.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the 49ers are playing. I forgot. Yeah, they won
So
last week.
that'll be on in the house, and I'll
Okay.
be spinning records during halftime. That's the only
Nice.
time I get to play music while they're listening to
Nice.
music. Yeah, so that's kind of what's happening.
Cool. All right, man. Well, have a good weekend. Yeah,
You too,
thanks for
Nate. It's
coming
good
on
to
for
see
part
you.
two. What do you say?
Good to see you as always. Good luck, man, and let me know how I can help or whatever. I'm here.
Yeah. Sounds good, man. All right. I'll talk to you later.
Take care. Bye.
Peace.